Hi everyone, and welcome to 3432 North Lake Drive, also known as the Samuel Field Mansion. I am very sorry that I can't be here with you this evening, but over the next 15 minutes, I will try to provide you with a brief history of the home, which is really the story of three men. Those three men are Samuel Field, who commissioned the house, August Fiedler, who was the architect, and Lewis Keene, who was the individual who moved the home from its original location in Juneau Park to where it stands today. Let's first turn to Samuel Field. Samuel was born in 1819 in Putnam County, New York. He went to the village school in the winters, and he assisted his father during the summers in his father's nursery. Ultimately, he left home and went to be a clerk in a large general store in Danbury, Connecticut, where he stayed for 11 years. He came to Milwaukee in 1850 when he was 31 years old in order to, quote, grow up with the country. In Milwaukee, Samuel is first listed with John Silkman in John Silkman's hat and cap business in the 1850 city directory. In fact, Samuel lived with John Silkman and John's wife Rachel for 21 years. Samuel and John went on to become very successful in real estate. In 1874, Samuel married Frances Bussey, described in one newspaper account as a young church organist. In this picture, she is second from the right, standing in back. This next image shows Frances around the time of her marriage. And at the time of her marriage, she was 35 years old and Samuel was 55. They did not go on to have any children. In 1886, Samuel purchased the property at 303 Martin Street that was ultimately to become the site of his home. In 1887, he and Frances left on a 2-year buying trip to Europe in order to buy paintings and objects of art for the home that was to be built, and they returned in 1889. At that point, Samuel commissioned August Fiedler to build the home. In this first picture of the home, you see the front of the house as it faced onto Martin Street, which is now known as State Street. If you were standing on the front steps looking out, you would have seen Martin Street in front of you, and the Leif Erikson statue that still stands in Juneau Park would have been to your right. This next picture of the house shows what it would have looked like from the east. You will notice that the house is taller than it is today, and we will get to that story in a little bit. This brings us to the story of August Fiedler, the architect. August Fiedler was born in 1842 in Elbing, Germany, which was formerly part of West Prussia, but is now part of Poland. He emigrated in 1869 and is listed in 1870 as a cabinet maker in New York. He then moved to Chicago in 1874. While living in Chicago, he was commissioned to do the interior for the Hegler-Karras Mansion in LaSalle, Illinois. Edward Hegler owned a zinc mine in LaSalle, and actually the zinc mine was located right next to the mansion. The architect on the project was William Lloyd Boyington, who also designed the Chicago Water Tower. Fiedler worked on the Hegler-Karras Mansion between 1874 and 1876, and he not only designed the interior, but also in some cases the furniture to match that interior. By 1877, Fiedler had his own furniture business in Chicago called the A. Fiedler & Company, but he ultimately went bankrupt and went back to New York, where he is listed as living in Brooklyn in 1880. He returned, however, to Chicago and was involved in doing some of the interiors for the Samuel M. Nickerson House at 40 East Erie Street, now known as the Driehaus Museum. This home was completed in 1883 and was designed by Edward Burling. It is believed that Fiedler designed the dining room in the home, here shown, but he may also have been involved in other rooms as well. If you haven't seen this museum, it is well worth a visit when you are next in Chicago. The interior details of the rooms are just stunning. At this point in the story, we return to Milwaukee. In this picture, you see the exterior of the new T.A. Chapman department store that was finished in 1885 after the store burned down in 1884. The architect for the T.A. Chapman building was Edward Townsend Mix. However, in an article published in the Weekly Wisconsin newspaper at that time, it indicates that T.A. Chapman hired August Fiedler of Chicago and John Trischka of New York to do the exterior decoration of the building. It appears that this may be how August Fiedler came to be involved in Milwaukee. In 1887, T.A. Chapman commissioned Fiedler to build the house at 1060 East Juneau Avenue as a wedding gift for his daughter Laura and her husband George Miller. It is now known as the George and Laura Miller House and is currently home to the Junior League of Milwaukee. The Chapman and the Field families were friends and often socialized together, and Samuel would have seen this home going up not far away from his 303 Martin Street property, which would have been located a block south of the Miller home. In 1890, shortly after returning from Europe, Samuel Field applied for a building permit for the 303 Martin Street location, and on the permit, the style of the home is listed as Norman. In 1893, August Fiedler was appointed the architect and superintendent of construction for the Chicago Board of Education, and in that capacity, he supervised the construction of 58 school buildings, probably his greatest legacy. Turning back to Milwaukee and to the Fields, Samuel and Frances continued to live in the home at 303 Martin Street until Samuel's death in 1909. Frances passed away in 1918, and following her death, the house was listed for sale by Nathaniel Green. This advertisement appeared in the Milwaukee Sentinel in March of 1919 and reads, "I am authorized to sell at a tremendous sacrifice the magnificent homestead of the late Mr. Samuel Augustus Field at number 303 Martin Street at the southeast corner of Juneau Place. Superb lake views, superior construction, wonderful location, a quality homestead in the extreme, at a price unparalleled in the annals of Milwaukee real estate, admission by appointment only." And this brings us in the story to Lewis Keene. Lewis Keene purchased the Field Mansion in 1920 when he was 53 years old. He was born in 1867 in the Alsace-Lorraine. He came to the U.S. in 1888 when he was 21 years old with $60 in his pocket. He is truly an American success story. He went first to Canton, Ohio, where he worked in a pottery shop and a bakery before becoming a punch press operator. In 1896, at the age of 29, he moved to La Crosse, Wisconsin to open a sheet metal business under the name of the La Crosse Steel Roofing and Corrugating Company. In 1902, he came to Milwaukee and organized the Milwaukee Corrugating Company with financial help from the Pritzlaff family. Lewis became president and treasurer and is shown here in his office. Milwaukee Corrugating Company ultimately became Milcor and much later was acquired by Inland Steel. Milcor had its headquarters on West Burnham Street and went on to open additional plants in La Crosse, Chicago, and Canton, Ohio, to name a few. On September 1st, 1903, Lewis Keene married Miss Viarda Rose, the daughter of George Rose of La Crosse, Wisconsin. They had 2 children, George, who was born in 1907, and Viarda, who was also known as Marie, who was born in 1908. Before moving to 303 Martin Street, the Keenes lived in this house at 937 North 33rd Street. In fact, Lewis applied for a permit to build a carriage house behind this home in 1911, and the carriage house, which incorporated a number of the products from his plant, still remains. As mentioned earlier, in 1920, having become very successful, Lewis Keene buys 303 Martin Street. Interestingly, however, at about the same time, he started building a compound up north, which he called Keene Crest. Keene Crest encompasses 240 acres and 1,800 feet of frontage on Duck Lake in the Land O'Lakes region of northern Wisconsin. As the story goes, he didn't tell Viarda about the project until he took her up there once it was completed. According to the family, he took her up there and asked her where he should place the hooks in the closets. And let's just say that Viarda was none too pleased about not having been told about the house. As you can see, the house is quite the compound, with the main lodge building, the views over the lake, numerous cottages, including also a workshop and a 2-story dog kennel, which every family needs. Back in Milwaukee in 1926, the Land Commission was buying up land to expand Juneau Park and to create the Prospect Avenue extension connecting Wisconsin Avenue to Prospect Avenue. In all, about 24 homes were raised, and by February 1928, the Field Mansion was the only remaining building standing in what was to become the expanded Juneau Park. In this photo, you can see the chimneys of the home in the back, just behind and slightly to the left of the statue. Note that in this picture, some of the other houses still remain in Juneau Park and have not yet been torn down. In 1928, Lewis Keene agreed to sell the site for $85,000 but retain the building. Because the house was too big to be moved, it was disassembled and reassembled at its current location. This next photo shows the completed Juneau Park and Prospect Avenue extension. As you can see from this photo, the houses are all gone from Juneau Park. Here is a picture of the home shortly after it was completed at its current location. As some of you may know, the house in Juneau Park was completely disassembled, every exterior stone was numbered, and was brought to this location. In addition, the interior woodwork was disassembled, stripped, and then reinstalled here and refinished in its present state. As you can see, the house in its current location is positioned exactly as it was downtown, with the front entrance facing north, which originally would have opened onto Martin Street. With the rebuild, however, Lewis Keene made a few changes to the home. He removed the ballroom floor and instead added on a 4-car garage. As you can see in this picture from the original house, the ballroom floor would have been on the 3rd floor and is represented by the windows with the semicircular tops over the entrance. And in the new photo from the house after it was moved, you see that that floor is no longer there, but that there is the addition of the 4-car garage. And he reused the windows and the stones from the ballroom floor in order to create that garage. In addition, he added the sunroom here pictured and the beer hall in which you find yourselves. Please note that this beer hall was built during the height of Prohibition. The family tells me that they had stills in the basement, which someone came to attend to once a week. They also had their own wine label, which they would put on the bottles, and the fruit flies that resulted used to apparently drive Viarda crazy. With the move, the bathrooms were also updated, for which we are very grateful. And as you can see in this photo, the copper roof is still dark brown. In fact, the copper tiles were a product that Lewis's company made, and as we restored the home, we found that the infrastructure in the home used many of the products that were advertised in the company catalogs at the time. Lewis and Viarda lived in the home for the rest of their lives, and although Lewis passed away in 1948, Viarda remained in the home until her death in 1960. Lewis apparently loved to entertain, and the family told stories of how he would call up Viarda and tell her that 18 people were coming to dinner, and she would scramble, albeit with a staff, to get everything ready. Lastly is a picture of the home today. Jock and I feel very lucky to be stewards of this home, which has such a long and storied history, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your evening with us. Please feel free to ask Jock any questions you might have. And thank you for supporting Lake Park Friends.